if you're told they have no perspective. It's the same dissatisfaction one feels when one hears a white male saying, "I am not a racist." It's a self-refuting remark, one you wouldn't feel compelled to make unless, "I'm not gay, I'm not a racist." New forms of certain things come back. "Oh, well, I'm not a racist." Always that. Wouldn't that relax you if you were an African American to hear that? "Oh, don't worry about me." Not very relaxing. Okay, all this is to set up genealogy and the process and project of suspicion. Well, in the Genealogy of Morals, now we're into the argument, and I don't think that I can finish it in one lecture, but we will start Nietzsche's argument in the Genealogy of Morals. Sorry about that. Nietzsche wants to trace the origin of our values. In other words, what are the values of these Western values? Not going to go into, this isn't an ethical theory. He wants to know what is the value of our values. Now, the question here, and I'll have to address it much later, is, well, what do you mean by value? And I've said rather vague things like value for life. And I'll have to fill that in later with an account of Nietzsche's own myths and other things, and I will try to do that later. But for now, I'm after purely negative game. In other words, now I just want to shoot my targets. Later I'll build some clay pigeons of my own. Right now I'm just shooting targets, okay? This is the negative part of the argument. Nietzsche wants to trace what is the origin of our values, the value of our values. In evaluation, interpretation, will are everywhere. We value things all over the place and differentially. And there are classic theories about ethical evaluations that surround, no matter how complex some of these get, they surround issues of good and evil. And that's one of the ways that Nietzsche draws the opposition within the West, the opposition between good and evil. I hope not too esoteric, since if you don't have that one down by the time you're about 6, horror movies don't make sense. You got to have that sort of a rough cultural idea, he wants to know what lies behind these evaluations. The procedure that he follows in this text is to make use of certain modes, forms, and kinds of psychological reasoning, certain modes, forms, and kinds of historical investigation, and importantly, he wants to look at the texts, the crucial ones that have helped to structure our understanding of whole bodies of discursive practices and the ways in which these evaluations have come to be made. The schema, as it were, of the book is as follows. We're going to look at the general question of the value of our values by looking at our morality. Our morality we're going to look at in its true and original home in religion. We're not going to take for granted that morality grew out of the Enlightenment and a set of procedural legal rules, but that morality grew out of the fertile, embodied, substantial, rich soil of religions. By religions, I mean important things people believed about their purposes, whether they'd live, die, and so on, and where they'd go afterwards. The kind of, ticked off questions that Job asked God, Why'd you mess with me? And what's going to happen if I die and you and the devil have really, mucked with me, and I want to know why. As you know, God's answer to Job is kind of rough. It's, shut up. I'm big, I'm mean, get off of here. I can do worse. If you've seen the movie Hellraiser, you know it's true, too, right? These are horrible movies. Don't go see all these movies. Hellraiser is a terrible movie. Specifically, Nietzsche wants to go to a religion that he takes to be crucially important in the moral development of the West. And I think that so does William Buckley. He and Nietzsche agree. Christianity. So Christianity will be one of our focuses. I want to say about Nietzsche's suspicion of Christianity that I don't buy the entire suspicion. I have a distinction I want to make, and it's a little bit critical of Nietzsche. For me, I like to make political distinctions. I prefer them to theoretical ones. For me, I want to distinguish two kinds of Christianity. And I'm not talking about Catholic and Protestant, although James Joyce thought those were interesting to distinguish. Does anyone remember what Joyce said when he ceased being a Catholic, and some British reporter asked him, well, have you lost your faith, sir? What's the problem here? Now that you've stopped being a Catholic, are you going to become a Protestant? To which Joyce responded, I've lost my faith, not my reason. Which, for you Catholics out there, I think that's a great remark. I've lost my faith, not my reason. In any case, I like to distinguish in Christianity between two kinds of religion. One represented by Billy Graham and the other by Martin Luther King. A name I suppose I can use a proper name, properly. Yeah. It's not slanderous to either one. But I like to distinguish between people who lead their people out of bondage and then people who are busy playing golf with the Pharaoh. It's a rough distinction between religious people, but some forms of religion have more of an interest in golf games with the Pharaoh. Others seem to have more interest in leading their people out of bondage. That's a distinction Nietzsche doesn't pay much attention to. I would like to. But for now, let's just get polemical, broad, and look at the Christianity in Nietzsche's way as a form of life, and look at it in relation to to first. For Nietzsche, there's Greek life, and it represents a certain thing to him. Nietzsche was trained as a classicist, and in spite of his acute intellect, I have to argue that he always remained a little too in love with the Greeks, a little bit. Nietzsche was trained that way. He always remained a little bit too enamored of them, although he was one of the people that helped to demystify many aspects of their life. He wants to look at the schema of values of the Greeks and how they became Christian values, which Nietzsche argues later become decadent and life-threatening and lead to a third kind of evaluation, which is really, as it were, the dead end that he sees civilization headed towards. And this is that threat I mentioned earlier of nihilism, that threat I mentioned earlier, the threat of nihilism. Not as a personal belief, but as something that could be the fate of a culture. Now, I ought to tell you that there are some contemporary theorists that believe this is all already over, that our culture, and this is why I've given the title of the course, Nietzsche and the Postmodern Condition. Some postmodern theorists have written in collections called What Do After the End of the World. They write essays, what do we do now that the world's over? Now that there aren't any humans left, what do we do in our word processors now? Sort of a new question, theoretical. Well, to find out why people write weird things like that, it's good to go to Nietzsche and trace this, the development of these values and of moralities from the Greeks through the Christian religion and on to this situation of nihilism that Nietzsche will discuss. Well, one of the ways that I like to do this is to try to warn you right away that if you read the Genealogy of Morals, and I hope you do, all of you, it's a good book. You should read it. It's fun. You don't have to read it. There are lots of good books, but if you do read it, watch out for a sort of invidious binary